What's going on, football fans? It's me, J.R. Clark, back again with another episode of Pound ATL. Today I'm joined by a special guest. I'm joined by Ian Cummins from Pro Football Network. He's decided to be gracious enough to take time out of his day to sit down and talk to us, or me rather, about the upcoming draft and the prospects. One of the things that me and Toby are trying to do this year is to bring on more voices than just ours and give y'all more perspectives than just what we hear on a daily basis. And I stumbled across Ian, in a sense, during some of those Twitter space chats that I've told y'all about, and he has some really good takes, some really interesting takes. I enjoyed his thought process that I heard, and then on our trip to the Senior Bowl, I bumped into him, and he was very, very pleasant, as he is, and decided to reach out and see if he'd be willing to come on the show. And obviously, as you see him, he is here. He has said yet. How are you doing tonight, Ian?
I'm doing good, man. Thank you. And you don't have to talk me up so much, man. I'm not that good. I'm not that good. I just try to provide, objective, honest analysis. I feel like that's what, anything less is disingenuous. So, I feel like that's kind of the main mode here. But yeah, I'm doing good. It's been a pleasure to dive into the class and recently getting to interview some guys and kind of getting their backstories and helping them tell their stories and, kind of learn about their journeys. That's been a great part of the process too. And then obviously the Senior Bowl was great to run into you, great to talk to you in person, and obviously watching those guys. I mean, obviously Falcons fans, all NFL draft fans had to pay close attention to the events there because there was a lot of talent on the field. So it was a fun time, a fun off season as always, and happy to be here.
Yeah, no, it's been a very interesting offseason, and I think it's been an offseason that isn't necessarily as clear-cut as it has been, in the past, and I think that's led some people to feel like, maybe this isn't necessarily as talented of a class, where I don't know. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that narrative, but before we dive too much into this class, something that we get asked quite a bit, so I've kind of thrown it into my, repertoire to ask people, what is your 30,000 foot view of your scouting process? When you decide all right, I'm gonna watch this guy, do you do a whole group, or do you bounce around? What is how do you go through your process?
Yeah, so the good thing about, I guess it's good and bad, because it can be, sometimes it gets a little scattershot in my brain, but it's very assignment based at PFN. Okay. There's guys that we have on the list, and it's like a conveyor belt. We run through them. So if there's a scouting profile that I got up on deck, I got a few up on deck before the combine, those are the guys that I'm going to dive into. Obviously, at the beginning of the season, you're starting with the high profile guys. I think my first one was on Garrett Wilson, and then it kind of worked my way down from there. And we have almost 250 up right now, so we're trying to build up more. But my watching isn't reserved to those guys. Obviously, I watch other guys outside of who I write up. But those are the ones that I really dive into and make sure that my deep dives when I'm writing up the scouting report, I want to make sure that it's comprehensive, that I cover all the boxes. As for what I'm watching for, and I have bulleted lists for the guys that I do watch in a separate doc, just to keep track of my observations on film. Mm-hmm. And, I have a grading scale in the works. It's not perfected yet.
Yeah, so I'm working on that myself this year. Yeah, this is the first time I've tried to put a grade on something. So, mm-hmm. I've took with the pass rushers, I come up with 5 or 6 categories and tried to mm-hmm. grade them and then average it all in. So yeah, that grading scale is interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting trying to quantify observations, right? I'd always steered away from that beforehand because it gets so nebulous, right? It's so hard to track what makes an 8.3, or whatever your scale is. What went into that? What went into that exact number? But then as I wanted to keep giving thorough, objective analysis and trying to be as transparent as possible for people. And as I went into that, I kind of realized, hey, a grading scale could help with that if you can communicate it effectively. So I've been experimenting with it this offseason. Mm-hmm. I'm not running with it with my full numbers. You'll see my big board on the draft guide coming up. That's not based on the grading scale. Mm-hmm. That's just kind of a subjective analysis. Again, But I am working on it, and I do have traits that I look for. Like for edge rushers, you're looking for maybe explosiveness,
Right.
bend, which there's different categories to bend, like ankle flexion, torso flexibility. Can you flip your hips and roll your hips through the apex? And then hand usage, of course, and there's categories for that too. And it's different for every position. But I have boxes that I try to check for each one, and then once I feel like I try to watch at least a few games, just because every game is different, every environment is different for what a player is going through, and I try to spread it out too, like maybe early in the season, late in the season, to see if there's progression there. That's also important. But once I feel like I'm kind of writing down the same stuff, I'm repeating myself a little bit more, not writing down a ton of new stuff. There's a point where I feel like, all right, I've capped.
Okay, yeah, you've gotten.
I think I have a good impression of who this player is, and that's when I kind of seal the deal, write it up, and so that's really the process. There's different traits that you look for at each position, and obviously another big part of it too is kind of closing yourself off from outside opinions. Now, obviously, I take outside opinions into account. It's valuable. It's a fine line to balance. Like, you obviously want to hear different people's perspectives because yours isn't perfect. But at the same time, if I'm trying to provide honest, subjective analysis, from my perspective, I don't want that perspective to be swayed by someone else.
See, I'm kind of glad you said that, because like, not definitely not trying to like dive off into my own backstory, but like when I started doing this, like pointing the camera at myself and recording, I found myself less and less listening to like football podcasts and radio hosts and talking heads, because I wanted my opinion to be my own, and I didn't want to be heavily influenced by the things that I was hearing from outside. So it's interesting to hear you say something similar. There's, and then here lately, I've been trying to like really curate the opinions that I listen to, trying to figure out like who is a good person to listen to, so to speak. So yeah, it's interesting to hear that. And like you, we had an old saying when I was growing up playing basketball. Like, I don't know, imagine me playing basketball. But anyway, if you could hit a shot 3 times in a row, first time's luck, second time's coincidence, third time is skill, right? And so, I've kind of applied that to, watching film in a sense. Like, try to watch at least 3 games and see if you can consistently do the same thing throughout 3 games. So that's cool. That it's interesting to hear how other people do their process and compare it to myself, especially somebody like yourself who is doing this on as professional as you can get. Doing it for a living, which is great. And as far as the Pro Football Network stuff, we last year during the draft, we downloaded y'all's whole PDF to have that written information for when guys were getting drafted. So yeah, y'all do a real good job, and I encourage anybody over there or anybody who's listening to go check out their draft stuff. So one of the main reasons why like sparked me to decide to reach out to you is because you do have some more interesting takes than I have seen, starting first of all with everybody's like kind of consensus number 1, number 2 guy is Aidan Hutchinson. So everybody like, I guess I want to put it like this. Do you think he's deserving of the hype that he's getting?
Yeah, so I'll kind of walk a fine line here, because I do think, when you're talking about subjective, and I used subjective and objective interchangeably earlier, I realized. I feel like the scouting process is kind of both. There's elements of both in that, it's your unique perspective. So it's going to be subjective, but I try my best to provide objective analysis within that lens. Like, I'm just saying what I see. I'm not, I'm trying not to spin anything or whatever like that, just saying what I see, just kind of the raw observations. And I think with Hutchinson, since it is subjective, I can see him being deserving of the hype. And, if someone has him as a top 5 player, I'm not going to scoff at that.
Right.
Everyone sees things differently. And, I could be wrong at the end of the day. So I think that's the valuable part of the process, is looking back on the results and seeing if you were wrong somewhere. And that's a great way to reevaluate your process and get better in the long run. So, me personally, I don't see the top 5 hype anymore. and we can get into that later. But if you see something differently, if you really like something about his game, then I'm not going to scoff at that.
Right.
I'm going to take your opinion into account. And yeah, it's subjective. So I can see why he'd be worth it. I can especially see why, with his hot motor, that lunch pail mentality, I can see why he'd win over NFL teams and have them take him higher than expected. For me, he's not there, but I can see it.
I got you. So what, like a lot of things I see is, high motor, and, he seems to have a decent toolbox worth of pass rush moves. So what are some of your concerns in the films that you have watched on Hutchinson?
Yeah, so I'll start with the good. Obviously, I do think he is, like we said, hot motor
Right.
guy. I mean, he's running at 100% all the time, and he's a ferocious competitor too. He's going to come at you with everything he's got, and I love that about the guy. I think he's got good speed to power, which is interesting because one of the knocks on him is his length. I think I overestimated his length in the offseason. It's always interesting. Usually you can get a pretty good read on guys, but there's always a couple where, you look at the measurement and you're like, what is that? Is that true? Right? So I've had a couple. I'm trying to get better at reading length. Obviously you need the measurements to get an exact figure, but, you can kind of tell when guys have longer arms or shorter arms. But I think Hutchinson, he's got sub 33-inch arms, and that's a crucial mark for edge rushers in the first round. I think the last one with sub 33-inch to go first round was Vic Beasley. As you know, didn't quite work out in the long run. So,
not nearly as much as we'd hoped it was going to. I was very excited during that draft.
Yeah, and I mean, hey, to be fair, that first year was good, and then it kind of trickled down from there.
Yeah, a couple good years, but
yeah, you being closer to that, you can speak to more of whether that sack production, because I know sack production isn't everything for edge rushers.
No,
so
it's really not. It's something that us as fans, and I definitely lump myself into that category. That's the easy thing to point at, is to say, oh well, he didn't have any sacks, or if he did have a lot of sacks. And then, but if you're wanting to take your process further, even as a fan, is why did he have those sacks? Is it because of what he was doing? Was it because of the, effect of somebody else? Like, that can be some of the knock on, like, Hutchinson and David Ojabo, in a sense, is they had each other. Like, so I know that both of them produced without the other on the field at times, but for the most part, your opposing offensive lineman is having to account for, two, premier edge rushers that can't do nothing but help the edge rushers.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that showed up on film a few times. Now, I'm not going to knock a guy for that if he's getting help from guys. I always look at the traits first, but there are instances, and people, I'd see people talking about Ojabo earlier on, when the hype was starting to build around him, and saying, well, hang on, because he got a lot of help from Aidan Hutchinson. That's true, but Ojabo also helped out Aidan Hutchinson a lot. You'll see Ojabo gets around the edge so quickly sometimes. He forces that quarterback to step up, and sometimes Hutchinson gets locked up when he's trying to get around the edge. Then he can turn around, surge back inside, kind of divert course and get to the quarterback because Ojabo flushed him into the pocket. So it's one of those things where, it's always going to be a symbiotic relationship. So you can't get caught up in that. You just got to look at the traits of the individual player and what he has to offer. So taking that into account, moving on to Hutchinson, I do think, and here's the thing, he's still a top 25 guy for me. He's still a first round guy. I wouldn't have any qualms taking him there. I think he'd be a very good player. But when you get into this range of the draft, the top 20, the top 15, the top 10, you really have to split hairs. Really have, like, if a guy has good explosiveness but not elite, then you need to knock him for that, because some guys above him have legitimately elite explosiveness. And that's kind of the conversation for me with Hutchinson. I think he's going to test very well as an athlete. I don't think he has an elite first step, though. And that can be the difference in getting around those NFL tackles sometimes. I think Ojabo, you look at them when they're both coming off with 100%, Hutchinson definitely comes off with a lot of heat, but Ojabo has a quicker first step. He's more explosive around the edge. I think he's bendier as well.
That I agree with completely.
Ojabo is really flexible, can get under the corner, can dip and rip. Hutchinson does have a little bit of torso flexibility, but his hips can kind of lock up at the apex sometimes and prevent him from rolling through those and getting around the corner. I think with Hutchinson, with me too, I do think he has good hand usage. He's very combative. He's violent. He's twitchy. I love that energy about him. but I don't think he's quite at the elite level where I can say he's going to completely supersede, some of the, not limitations, but non-elite traits,
Right.
the non-elite bend, the non-elite explosiveness. I do think he's going to be a very good player. I do think he's going to be productive, but, when you're juxtaposing these edge rushers at the very top of the class, you need to ask yourself not just what they are now, what can they become?
You gotta have a good measure of Miss Cleo in you, and try to predict the future on what they can be. Which kind of brings me to my next point in a sense, like moving on, staying in the edge rusher class for a minute, because let's be honest, the Falcons, we need an edge rusher, and it's really, as the draft process is starting to play out, there's really looking like there's a good chance that one of these, like top 10 guys, or not, maybe even top 5 guys, may be sitting there at 8, if they so choose to go that route. And so another interesting thing via the draft process so far is you have Kayvon Thibodeaux, who seems to be slipping in the draft process for the unquantifiable reasons, like he may take some plays off, or like questioning his effort or whatever. Like, how much does that for you go into your process, or how much of that have you heard, I guess you could say?
Yeah, so it does go into my process a little bit. It's hard to quantify the unquantifiable stuff, like you said. It's really hard to do that. Like character, what's he like off the field, the motor stuff. I do have a section on my grading scale, in progress grading scale for motor. So it is something I try to take into account, like how much heat is this guy bringing, how much energy is he bringing, because having that energy and that confidence to play fast is a big part of it, and some guys have the athleticism, but they don't quite have the confidence to use those hand rushing moves effectively, and sometimes when they do, they don't really channel it effectively. Sometimes they're kind of uncoordinated. So it's really complex, the whole equation that goes into it. And with having said that, with Thibodeaux, personally, I haven't seen it.
Right.
Or I have seen the motor. I haven't seen the concerns that people are bringing up. I think that, I think we're kind of overthinking him a little bit.
I think so too.
I look at the tape, and it's just he's bringing a lot of heat. He's playing with a fast pace, and he's playing urgent, especially in pursuit too. You'll see this guy tracking plays across the field. He doesn't really quit on plays that much. I think, to me personally, this is my opinion on what's happened, is there was that video of him talking about Alabama schools, kind of bashing Alabama schools a little bit. And I said this on another pod too. I don't really agree fully with what he said, because I'm sure there's smart people at Alabama too. Like, I don't want to gloss over an entire school like that. That's not my business. But it's not something that I'm going to knock the guy and say he's a character red flag. I mean, he definitely brings the heat on the field. He's improved every year, especially this year with his hand usage. It still can be better. There are times when, he's trying to get around the edge and he can't really stack counters proficiently enough to kind of peel off and, kind of clear the guy around the corner. There's times when he can better capitalize on his physical traits. But there are flashes of him, deceiving, setting up tackles with long arms, and then kind of using that ghost to get under him. There's times where he uses that forklift and then rips down the anchor and surges past him. He's shown he can stack moves and set up tackles. He definitely has the capacity for that. And then you take that into account, and then you look at the physical upside with him.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this guy's explosive. He's got great speed to power with that length. Hutchinson doesn't have the length, so he can get good speed to power. But, when you have longer arms, it naturally provides you a better conduit for speed to power. Right. You can just surge into those guys. You got more leverage. And Hutchinson, another thing in the Thibodeaux versus Hutchinson that I think Thibodeaux is much better at is lowering his pads and getting under guys. I think Hutchinson, he's great. He's a hot motor guy, but he plays with a high pad level a lot, not the most efficient mover. I think that Thibodeaux is really good at sinking and surging his pads into contact, lowering his center of gravity, and being able to bend under guys too. He does have good ankle flexion. Again, can be better capitalizing on that, but it's there.
Right.
So if he can work on that, I think he's got all the physical tools to be a blue chip edge rusher. So me personally, I'm not overthinking it. He's still a top 5 guy for me, and I'm just sticking with that.
Yeah. Early in the the process for us, there were some guys that I just checked off. Like, okay, I'm not at this point. I'm not wasting my time per se, because they're not going to be there at 8. And he was a guy who early on that I didn't really pay him know mine in a sense because I just knew. I was like, all right, this is one of the top guys. He's going to be gone in the first 5 picks, first 6 picks. So unless we decide to trade up, he's not going to be there. So I was going to focus my energy on players that I thought might be there and past the first round as well. Because a lot of people do forget that the draft doesn't end at round 1. There's more talent to be had. But after like hearing, that he might be slipping, I was like, all right, well, I guess I need to at least be more than, casually familiar with his play. And one of the plays that sticks out to me, from Thibodeaux was like a fake spin to a bull rush. I was like, I'd never seen anybody do anything. Like, he didn't get the sack on that particular play. But the fact that he did it, like, you go a half a spin and then come back around and start bull rushing somebody, like, that makes an offensive lineman think,
It's impressive in multiple fronts because on one hand, he's experimenting with it.
Right.
He's actively thinking about how to set these guys up and then capitalize on it. But then on the other hand, just the sheer level of agility you need to execute that half spin, that the sheer level of agility and control you need to, half spin backward, then explode back around and bull rush the guy.
That was extremely impressive. Like, and I think that came like either the play before or the play after. They had tried to block him with a well, it was the UCLA game. They tried to block him with Greg Dulcich, and I was like, oh, no, it's not going to work, man. You can't like you can't do that to that man.
Yeah.
But no, that's cool. So yeah, that's a prime example of potentially overthinking, the process. And not just, looking at the traits or what have you. Now, granted, these, NFL scouts, they have access to a lot more information and access than we do, versus like background checks and all that kind of stuff. So they'll suss all that stuff out. But if he's there sitting there at 8, our guy better run up there with the card in hand, jumping up and down. If not, I'll be upset. But I kind of want to move like out of the first round because, like I said, a lot of times we get so like focused on who we're picking first, and that's just one guy, Now, albeit that can be a franchise-changing guy, but even in our own team, like right now, our best defensive player on the defensive line is Grady Jarrett, and who we picked in the 5th round. So, and at times in his career, he's been compared to, or in the same conversation as an Aaron Donald. So, that doesn't come lightly. So you can find, talent all over the place. And another place that we're going to need to try to find some talent on is wide receiver. I really feel like that we're going to have to sink some resources into that wide receiver room. And as of late, I've been watching or trying to watch some, I'm going to butcher his last name, so y'all going to have to bear with me here, is Eric
Ezukanma. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
From Texas Tech. And I saw your tweet, about so somebody was making like, what's your controversial tweet? And you said something about like him being in the top 10 of wide receivers or whatnot. So that was one of the things that caught my eye. And I was like, all right, that's about third or fourth time I've seen this man's name pop up on my timeline. So I really need to give him a look. And the games I watched must have just been bad games because, well, he didn't get hardly any targets. So it's hard to evaluate a wide receiver when the play call is an RPO that they hand off almost every time. But tell me about Eric, please, sir.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that, I'd understand if people were a little lower on him because the consistency, the production wasn't quite there. He was always a solid producer, never gotten a 1,000-yard season. And I think you see that at Texas Tech. I think, there were some times where he was a little inconsistent, but I also think Texas Tech could have done a much better job of getting him the football. That was something that showed up a lot for me. And I think that, I think you look at him and Treylon Burks, kind of a similar type of prospect, and that they're both pretty big. Burks is a little bit bigger. I think he's a little more explosive in open field, but they're both kind of the similar types in that they're very good run after catch threats, but they also have the length to convert in contested situations. And I think that, looking at Ezukanma in that light, I think Arkansas did a much better job of feeding the ball to Burks, whereas with Ezukanma, he was fighting for targets with some other guys, and they just weren't looking his way a ton. Like, I know I was watching the TCU game the other week because that was a game he got like only a couple receptions.
Like, it was into the third quarter. And I
Yeah,
was like, are
yeah.
they going to throw this man the ball?
I know
I
it's
think that was the
insane.
first game I put on because I was like, TCU's got a generally good defense,
Yeah.
and so I figured that would be a good matchup to watch.
Mhm.
And like I said, I was deep into the third quarter going, are they going to throw him the ball? Because I really
Mhm.
would like to see him actually catch it.
Yeah, and the fun thing with him is he doesn't have to catch it either. I know they got him the ball coming out of the backfield too, and he can do that.
Mm.
Like I think he's has pretty good explosiveness. Again, not quite at Burks' level, but I do think he has good to great explosiveness. He can gear up pretty quickly. And he's got good long speed too. I think he might, maybe a low to mid 4.5. I'm guessing. I think he'll have better explosiveness than his long speed, but he has enough speed to stack some defensive backs. He's done that before, usually with a little bit slower DBs, but he's got long strides. He can cover ground really quickly. He's pretty elusive. He's got great contact balance, and that shows up in a few games. He can bounce off of guys. He's a really dense frame. But the TCU game was eye-opening for me because I was trying to look back because I knew I was high on the guy. So I was trying to am I too high on this
Right,
guy? Let
right.
me reevaluate. And yeah, he's not getting the ball, but there's some deep hitch routes where he is really doing a good job of chopping his feet and sinking his hips, decelerating really quickly and exploding out of his brakes. And he's still doing the work. Obviously, being as big of a guy as he is, when you've got a guy like Travius Hodges Tomlinson, the TCU corner, he's like a gnat, man. The dude is just sticky. I was wondering who's going to come out this year, but he went back. But he's definitely smaller, but you can tell Ezukanma isn't quite there in terms of the absolute fluidity and agility. But for his size, is very good. And I
Right.
think the route running, the hip sync, being able to decelerate so quickly, some of those hitch routes were really impressive. I think he's a higher level route runner than Burks is right now, and I do think that he has comparable physical talent. I think that he's very, very underrated. I think some good games to watch to get a sense of that peak. Houston is
Okay.
one, Oklahoma, Iowa State. Now, obviously, you want to watch the quiet games too, but watching that TCU game, it definitely looked like he could have gotten the ball more. There were some times where he was open, using those routes to his advantage, and he still didn't get the ball. So I think Ezukanma, NFL combine testing is going to be big for him. Can he make the most of that? And preparation is a big thing that goes into that. So I hope he's been preparing. Usually these guys are.
Oh yeah,
It's a big
yeah.
opportunity.
I think a
You
lot
got
of
to
them
make the most
understand
of it.
that
Yeah,
in this
yeah,
day and age. My only concern with Ezukama is that I think I said that close to being right.
yeah. You got it. You got it.
Was like the lot of the in breaking routes, he didn't
Mhm.
seem to create a ton of space
Yeah.
between him and the corner, and that was and I'm still pretty early on. I think I watched the TCU game and then part of the Oklahoma game, so I'm
Mhm.
still in that process of evaluating him, and that was one of the only one of the few notes I liked his speed, but it didn't seem to where he was able to make that sudden break to create that separation coming across the middle.
Mhm.
But depending on how he's used, that may not necessarily be the end of the world. With the good contact balances you're talking about, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, those are the kind of receivers that Arthur Smith, we project that he's looking for, right?
Yeah.
Those yards after contact, yards after catch, kind of receivers that he didn't necessarily have this year that he definitely had up in Tennessee with A.J. Brown and Corey Davis. So a guy like Eric would, with that contact balance, could be a welcome addition, and also with the versatility. I mean, we saw, everybody's looking for that next, Deebo Samuel, or as we say here in Atlanta, the next Cordell Patterson. That versatile offensive weapon, or as I've seen it coined somewhere, a wide back, which I really like. I hope
Mhm.
that catches
Yeah.
on. I like
That's a
that.
fun one.
Yeah, but if he's a guy who can do those kind of things, that can add to his versatility, or add to his role for a team. And
Mhm.
another guy who I want to bring up briefly in the wide receiver room that has been getting some love from the guys that I talk with, and seeing you echo it as well, has made me again perk up, is that Sky Moore
Yeah.
from Western Kentucky. Is that right?
Western Michigan.
Michigan.
Yeah.
Messed that one up.
I know. I always get those mixed up too. The two
Yeah,
westerns.
yeah. Just
Yeah.
Kentucky is Zappy, and so
Mhm.
yeah. But anyway, so now one of the guys I talked to quite a bit, he champions Sky Moore as being that Treylon Burks, potential offensive weapon. Is that how you see him, or you'll have to fill me in on Sky Moore? I just know the name at this point.
Yeah, I think me personally, I see him as more of a slot guy at the next level. I think that's what he's designated for. I like him a lot. He's definitely a different style than Ezukanma. I think Ezukanma's a guy, just get the ball in his hands and let him work. I think Sky Moore, again, it's kind of a similar. No, I mean, you always want to get the ball in the hands of your playmakers, right? But I think with Sky Moore, the way you're getting him the ball is just let him separate in the short and intermediate ranges. I think that's where he's best. I don't think he has an elite deep speed. I don't think he has quite that level. I think he might go like mid to late or mid to early to mid 4.5s if I had to guess, which for his size isn't great. He doesn't quite have the speed to stack DBs consistently, but in the short and intermediate ranges, in the slot where he can get on guys, I mean, this dude is a menace, man. I loved his play style. If there's such a thing as an explosive and violent route runner, he is it. Okay. I mean, violent in the sense that every motion is deliberate and detailed and really intentful. Like he's just shaking up guys left and right, against press coverage, a very sudden and twitchy route runner who can really generate displacement at the drop of a hat. I mean, he can explode out of his breaks, very good at sinking his hips and really generating that explosive capacity. And then he's very manipulative too. I mean, he's good at, setting up DBs, getting them off balance and then surging inside. So he puts guys on the string. I love his ability to separate. Press coverage is interesting because he's definitely a smaller receiver, doesn't have a big reach. So you'd expect him to get jammed a lot. But he's so twitchy and so sudden and so hard to handle. It's tough. And you don't want to jam because that's when he gets a step on you.
Right.
So he's very good at manipulating defensive backs and separating naturally. And he's also got some pretty nice slippery run after catch ability too. He's not the most dense guy. He's never going to bowl people over or bounce off of them, but he does bring that suddenness after the catch too. So I love, and then you'll look at him after a big play, he's celebrating, he's screaming, he's hooting and hollering, so I love that energy too. It's not something you can quantify, but you know it when you see it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the guy, he's got an alpha mentality in a 5'9", in a 5'10", 195-pound frame. Again, never going to be that elite contested catch threat that Ezukanma would be with his length and size, but Sky Moore's style is just put the DB on a string and just leave him in the dust.
Oh,
I mean, that's what he does, especially in the short and intermediate ranges. Separate, get him the ball. I think he can be a very good chain mover at the next level, and there's always a market for those guys.
Yeah, I'm about to say all those traits that you just described. I think any NFL team would be have a role for that kind of guy, and those kind of guys have made those are the type of guy that you look up in like 10, 15 years and when he's retiring and going, holy crap, he put up those kind of numbers, that kind of deal, So, yeah, we're going to have to, draft guys like that in the later rounds, fourth round and back potentially, because the amount of holes that we do have and the state that the Falcons wide receiver room is in currently, there's going to definitely need to be an influx of talent, especially if, Ridley ends up ends up exiting, as a lot of us feel like he might. We're definitely going to need an influx in talent. And if they decide not to go, I just don't know if I see a receiver that is like top 10 worthy at this junction. And that may lead.
And another thing too, I think if you're the Falcons, you got to play the board too. I think, not just having a wide receiver not worthy of the top 10, which there are a few guys that I like, but I like a lot in round one. But also, if you're the Falcons, you have a lot of needs, and the wide receiver class is very deep. So I think you can't afford to wait until round 2, round 3, round 4 to get your first guy. You can stack another one, with one of the later picks. It's a very deep class, so the opportunity's there.
Yeah, another guy who, I won't spend much time on because I think I did a whole video on him, but really put his name out there. In my opinion, was that Christian Watson out of North Dakota State, like he showed up big at the Senior Bowl, opened up a lot of eyes. My co-host who's normally with me, he was already pretty high on him, and that his performance at Senior Bowl just confirmed a lot of stuff and really opened my eyes. And you have a guy who's 6'5", and can do some of the things he can do. If you compare him with the 6'6" Kyle Pitts, like that could be an interesting.
That's a lot of fun,
right? Yeah, that could be an interesting pairing. But I kind of want to talk about, like, to wrap this up, to start wrapping, the conversation up here, is I want to get your take on this draft in general. Like, do you think it's lower in talent than, maybe some other drafts, or is there just not a splashy enough name at the top, and that's why we're trying to discount this whole thing?
It's a tough question, man. It's something I've been grappling with every day,
Mm-hmm.
because I do see a lot of people talking about how it's not a great draft. I think that for me personally, well, one, I think that the outcomes that you see from players is not completely dependent on the player. It's also dependent on the scheme, the landing spot. So
That's
I
right.
think, that alone is enough for me to say, well, I think there's more than enough talent to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Can they work with it? That's the next part of the equation. So I guess to circle all the way back, bring it full circle, yes, I do think there's enough talent. I don't think it's a bad class, especially, some of these positions are crazy deep. Like
Yeah.
you look at wide receiver, even running back. I know if you're looking for running back, maybe a good value deal on
Yeah.
day 3. Yeah, like there's guys there. I think the tackle class has gotten stronger as the process has gone on. I think there's a lot of solid players there. Again, maybe for the Falcons, maybe getting a guy either on day 2 or developmental guy on day 3. Obviously the trenches on both sides can be addressed. I think that the defensive tackle class, there's some guys
Winfrey,
that
man,
it's a little weaker, but I do think there's some guys that need more hype that are kind of getting overlooked. The edge class is insane. I mean, we've already talked about that plenty, but the depth is there. And if Thibodeaux isn't there at 8, if you're not comfortable with a guy, that's another position where you can just take the best player available. Like, let's say Hamilton is there.
Hamilton, Sauce, or somebody like that. And
like you can easily get an impact player edge on day 2, or maybe even stack a couple, so it's a very strong class.
you were talking earlier about, like, trying to get better at looking at projecting size, and a guy who really tripped me up was Majay Sanders. Watching him play and then finding out, like, that he's closer to 250, 260. I was like, I had him pegged at like 235, 240, and so, this edge class has been a fun one to look at, because, like, this, if you mix the edge class and the defensive line class together, it's almost like a box of chocolates. It's like, what type are you looking for? And that guy's there,
Exactly. Yeah.
Whether it's a bendy guy like Nico Benito or Majay Sanders, or is it a stout edge like, Josh Pascal, or trying to think of another,
like Trayvon Walker
or even Kingsby Ingberry or Ingbrey. So there's a lot of, like, just a lot of variety, and that's something that I'm definitely enjoying. The same deal with the I say a lot of variety in running backs. It almost seems like every running back that's coming out is 6'1", 220. Because
honestly, man, I mean, there's a lot of good ones in that mold. I mean, there's a few guys who can be good scat third down backs too. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys who could be workhorses. I mean, obviously, you look at the first few: Breece Hall, Isaiah Spiller. Breece Hall, I've been grappling with him. He's my RB1 for the time.
Right. I think I'm there with you.
Yeah, they're all really close, man. It's crazy. Kenneth Walker, if he could, at least prove himself as a receiver, he never did that. So that's the one thing holding him back. But I think, pound for pound, I think he's the best pure runner in the class. But I do like those guys: Damian Pierce, Brian Robinson. There's a few others down the line. So the running back class is really strong. I mean, that's one where you can just get really good value. The corner class too. I forgot to mention that.
The corner class is I think sitting at 8. In the early process, we're in a real sweet spot to grab an impact player, whether it be offensive or defensive. Like you said before, with the amount of holes that we have on this roster, it's like you can't go wrong at this point. Just, pick grab a dart and throw it at the board and go with it, because I just don't think that you could really mess up there. But yeah, you're talking about, Breece Hall or whatever, to serve, kind of call back to the grades and stuff. Me and my co-host come up with, we modified a formula that he had picked up somewhere for, like, production numbers for edge rushers, and we modified it to fit every position group. So, you take, like, for running backs, you take yards, touchdowns and attempts, add those together and then divide it by the amount of games played, and you come up with a number, And Breece Hall had by far, like, the best number out of all of them. and which really made my eyes stand out even more because it was just head and shoulders above everybody else. So, but yeah, man, it's the process is a lot of fun, and as I get deeper into it, it's opened my eyes up to just almost standing back in awe of the things that y'all do at Pro Football Network and some of the other guys out there, the draft networks and even the NFL networks. I mean, that's a lot of work that goes into this. And but I mean, I really, like I said again, I really appreciate you stepping up or stepping in here tonight and chatting with me. So on a final note, I'd like to know what is one name, what is one player that you think that people should be paying more attention to? You can call it a sleeper, you can call it whatever. What name is not on a radar that should be on radars in Ian Cummins' opinion?
Shoot, man, that's a tough one because Ezukan was usually my go-to. We already talked about him. So we already got him. So shoot. I mean, there's a few. Like, here's the thing. I don't want to. Usually, when a guy is in that like 200 to 300 range, there's a reason they're there. So I don't want to go and say there's a guy that's supposed to be top 50 in that range. I do think if I could pick a couple, Tyler Smith out of Tulsa, he's got some hype. He's got some people who like him, but I don't think the buzz has quite gotten around yet. I really like him. I think athletically very well put together, moves really well for his 6'3", 330-pound frame.
Right.
And then he's violent. He's a mauler. He's really, really physical in the run game and the pass game. Can be a little uncoordinated. Definitely, lacks synergy with his hands and his base at times. But if you can get him with a good coach, I mean, he's got all the tools to be a lockdown tackle. So I'm a big fan of him. On defense, I would say, shoot, man. I mean, probably Jalen Armour-Davis of Alabama. I had the chance to interview him, and he's a very impressive guy. I mean, very he's humble, down to earth, and he's interesting because he was a high-profile recruit, played receiver in high school, but then this past year was having a really good year, and then got injured down the stretch with a hip injury, and some of his play down the stretch he was injured, so he couldn't be at 100%. Missed most of the college football playoff, so he's kind of flying under the radar right now. But Armour-Davis, I think, very well put together. He's got great speed and explosiveness, fluidity. He's got good length too, got good size, pretty well put together. And the thing that gets me with him is, talking to him, you can tell he's a student of the game. He was telling me about his favorite corners to watch, like Darius Slay, other guys, and he's not just talking about who he likes to watch, but what he likes to watch from them. He's like, oh, I got this inch reset and my press technique that I like to watch from this guy. It's so fun to hear him talk about that because he was going so in depth. And then looking at his press technique on tape, you can tell like he knows when to punch, he knows when to match guys. He's got really good footwork in his press technique. So, and then on top of that, having the fluidity, the short range burst. So I think Armour-Davis is a guy. Usually there's an Alabama cornerback to grapple to in these classes.
Right.
It seems like we don't have that in this class, but I do think Armour-Davis is he's going under the radar. Partly because of the injury. He was only a 1-year starter, but he worked for it, and he made the most of it when he was playing. I think that I think he could open some eyes at the combine and maybe be a gem in this class. I think he's a fun player as well.
Well, good. I wrote that down because that guy definitely was not on my radar, and I'm not sure if my co-host who did the cornerback group for us, if he grabbed him or not. So I'm gonna have to bring that name up.
I'll say a couple more.
Yeah.
Sorry, they're coming to my mind. Josh Johnson, Tulsa, wide receiver. That's one that's kind of under the radar.
Okay.
A couple Tulsa guys, but at the Shrine game especially, man, he really opened my eyes. He sinks his hips really well and accelerates really easily out of his routes. He's very twitchy, but then I think he measured in with like 32-inch arms at 5'10", which is very, very good proportional length. I mean, 32-inch arms is like over 50th percentile for wide receivers, so above average. So he's got a really good wingspan with that, quickness and short range ability and hip sink. So Josh Johnson is a guy who could go on to be a really good player. And then, who was the other one? Oh, Matthew Butler, defensive tackle, Tennessee.
Yes, okay, I've heard his name a little bit.
One of the, I think for my money, a top 100 guy and one of the most explosive defensive tackles in this draft. I mean, he came out with like a 32-inch vertical in high school, so that's kind of his athletic floor. And then, usually guys develop that a little bit in college. So he gets off the line in a hurry, very violent player, really good lateral agility. And he's got the ankle flexion to stun outside and get around the edge, too. So he's at 6'4", 290, or I think it was like 6'4", 6'3.5", 299 is what I think he measured in at the Shrine Bowl. So if you're looking for another 3-tech, I think he fits the bill right there. So he's another fun one.
Awesome. Well, man, I very much appreciate your time. Tell the folks where they can find you and bug you at.
All right. Well, yeah, if you want to ask me questions, put my takes on fire, I appreciate it. You can follow me at Ian_Cummings_9. I'm getting tongue tied over here. But yeah, that's where you can find me on Twitter. Pro Football Network is at PFN365. We got a draft guide coming out. Obviously, I got to shout out my guys, Cam Mellor, Ali Hodgkinson. He's a big fan of Christian Watson.
There you go.
And then James Fregosa as well. A really good draft team. Really blessed to be a part of that team and work with those guys every day. So shoot them a follow and keep an eye out for more of our draft work coming out. And it's a fun season, man. It's what we live for.
It's been a lot of fun. But again, like I said, I appreciate it. And folks, y'all can always follow me on Twitter. I'm at Grimm1128, GRIMM1128. Live shows every other week, and just keep your eyes peeled to the channel as we have more videos like this that should be popping up, hopefully, if people respond to my inquiries. But anyway, Ian, I appreciate your time. And folks, as always, let's just rise up.